They gave me a desk the size of a ration tray and a patch that said Earth Detachment in 3 languages, 2 of which I couldn't read, and for the first 4 months on Tessel Deep that was the whole of my job. I sat in the recovery wing of a mining colony 1,100 meters under an iron-gray sky, drew a contract salary the Conquered paid in scrip, and waited for the day somebody needed an old man and an older dog. The dog's name was Boone. Black Labrador going on 11, gray coming in around his muzzle like frost that wouldn't melt. He'd been retired twice on paper, and both times somebody senior had torn up the paperwork, because there was no instrument in the Conquered catalog that did what Boone did with a nose and 4 legs and a patience that bordered on contempt. He slept under my desk with his chin on my boot. When the os walked past, he opened one eye, decided they were not worth standing for, and shut it again. The os ran Tessel Deep, and the os did not understand him. You have to picture them to understand the whole of it. They stand a head and a half taller than a tall man, segmented, plated in a carapace the color of wet slate, 4 arms folded close when they're thinking and spread wide when they're not. They have no nose. None. Somewhere far back in their evolution, the os traded smell for something else, and what they got instead was a sense for vibration, and a brain wired to read instruments the way you and I read a friend's face. An os doesn't sniff the air to know a storm is coming. An os reads the deep scan and knows, to the meter, where the water table sits and how fast it's rising. They built a civilization on that. They went down into the dark of 40 worlds and pulled out the metals that built the Conquered, and they did it by trusting their machines the way a priest trusts scripture. Which is a fine thing to do, right up until the machine is wrong. The galleries at Sumer were old workings, the deepest on the planet, cut into a seam of iron-laced shale that the os called Blackstone and prized for reasons I never fully grasped. Dense rock, heavy, the kind that swallows a signal and gives back half. I'd flagged that in my first month in a report nobody read, because deep rescue men on Earth had learned the same lesson in coal a long time before any of us went to the stars. Iron in the rock plays hell with anything that pings. I'd written it down. I'd filed it. I'd gone back to my desk the size of a ration tray. Then the 17th of the cold season came, and the lower west drift of the Sumer galleries came down. I felt it before the alarm. You feel a deep fall in your teeth, a long low cough of the world settling, and then the dust comes up the shafts ahead of the sound like the breath of something that has just exhaled. Boone was up before I was, not barking. Boone didn't bark at much. He was just standing, ears forward, looking at the door, and that was its own kind of alarm. By the time I got to the staging hall, the os had already turned it into a command post, and the command post was already certain. That was the thing about them. There was no panic. There was a beautiful, terrible order to it. 3 of them stood around the master array reading the returns, 4 arms moving across the surfaces, and a 4th os, the overseer, a big old one named Wren with a carapace scarred pale across the shoulders from 40 years underground, stood with all 4 arms folded and listened. "Section count," Wren said. 11 recovered to the muster line, one of the readers answered. 11 of 12. The 12th. Apprentice cutter, designation soul, last position the lower west face ahead of the fall, the drift is closed. The reader's voice did not change. Scan shows the void behind the fall flooded to the 3rd bench. No bioelectric return. No thermal return above background. Probability of survival declining. Margin. Within the instrument margin, overseer, the void reads empty of the living. I want to be fair to them. They were not cold the way you'd mean it. There was grief in that hall, the os kind, which is a stillness so complete it makes a room feel underwater. Somewhere behind the array, an older os had gone down onto her lower limbs and folded inward, and another stood over her with 2 arms across her back, and I learned later that the one on the floor was a senior cutter named Ressa, and the apprentice behind the fall was hers, her work child. Among the os that is not a smaller thing than blood, it may be a larger one. So no, not cold, but certain. The instruments had spoken, and to an Oss the instruments were the truth, and the truth was that the lower west drift was now a grave. I came up to the edge of the array with Boone at my knee, and I said, "I'd like to put the dog on it." Wren turned all four of his eyes on me. It takes a while to get used to being looked at by an Oss. They don't blink in sequence. The whole face shifts at once, like a wall turning to face you. "The animal," he said. "The animal has a nose," I said. "Your scan reads thermal and bioelectric, and it reads them through 10 meters of blackstone, which is the worst rock in the catalog for it. I flagged that in month 1. The dog reads air. If there's an air path out of that void, a crack, a seam, anything the size of my thumb, and if there's anything alive on the other end of it, the dog will know before your array warms up. The void is flooded to the third bench. Flooded isn't sealed. Water finds a level. Air goes over the top of it. I've pulled live men out of flooded workings on 3 planets, Overseer, and every one of them was breathing through a gap your machines told the rescue boss wasn't there." A younger Oss had come up beside Wren while I talked. This one I'd seen around the wing, a safety officer, lean for an Oss, a pale stripe down the center of the carapace that marked the young. The name was Sevet. Sevet's arms weren't folded. That was the first thing I noticed about Sevet, and I held on to it. Wren was quiet a moment. Then he said the thing I'd been dreading. In the flat way an Oss says a thing that to them is simply self-evident. "The site will be settled," he said. "By doctrine, when the array reads a worked void empty of the living for the duration of 1 shift, the void is settled and sealed. It is not cruelty, it is mercy. We do not send the living into a fall that will take a second life chasing a body the rock has already kept. The drift will be charged and closed by the end of 3rd shift. The dead are not abandoned. They are given to the stone. This is our way." "How long has the array read it empty?" 6 hours. "Your shift is how long?" 30. "Then by your own doctrine," I said, "I've got the better part of a day. Give me the day. If the dog finds nothing, you seal it and I'll help you set the charges myself. If he finds something, you've lost a day and gained a cutter. Tell me what's expensive about that math." Sevet spoke for the first time. The young one's voice was higher than Wren's with a buzz under it. "Overseer, the detachment's report from the cold season's start. The one regarding signal attenuation in high iron rock. I read it." A pause. I was the only one who read it. Wren looked at the young one for a long time. Then he looked at the old cutter on the floor, Ressa, who had lifted her head and was looking at me, and at the dog beside me with all 4 eyes. And there is no instrument in the Concord that can read what was in that look, but I'd been looking at the faces of people in the worst hour of their lives for 40 years, and I knew it anyway. It was the thing every searcher lives off. It wasn't hope, exactly. Hope is too clean a word. It was the refusal to let go of the rope, while there was any rope left to hold. "You have until the end of 3rd shift," Wren said. "The galleries are unstable. If the array reports further movement, I will pull you and the animal whether your work is done or not. Is that understood, Earthman?" "Cal," I said. "My name's Cal, the dog's Boone." "It is understood, Cal." I took Boone down into the dark. You don't run a search dog. That's the first thing nobody who hasn't done it understands. They see the dog and they think speed. They think a hound baying down a trail, and they want you to hurry because the clock is the only thing they can feel. But a live-find air-scent dog isn't following a track on the ground. He's reading the air itself, reading where it moves, where it pools, where a thread of scent the width of nothing is riding a current up out of a crack 100 meters off, and you cannot hurry the air. You work the dog into the wind, and you let him tell you where the wind has been. You watch him the way you'd watch the only gauge on a failing machine, because that's what he is. The lower galleries were a ruin. The fall had taken the west drift clean off. Where the tunnel had been there was now a face of broken blackstone reaching from the floor to a roof we couldn't see. The slabs of it canted at every angle. water seeping black between them and running off down the bench in sheets. The Os had rigged work lamps along the standing portion, hard white light that made everything look dead. The air down there was thick and cold and tasted of iron and crushed rock and the ozone bite of cut power lines. And somewhere under all of it, if there was anything to find, was the thing Boone was built to find. He went to work without being told. That's the part that used to put a lump in my throat back when I still let it. You bring an old dog to the edge of a hole that's just killed 11 near misses and might kill you, and he doesn't hesitate, doesn't look back at you for permission, doesn't do anything but lower his head and start reading the world. He worked the base of the fall first, methodical, nose down then up then down, testing the low air and the high air, his tail moving in that slow, steady sweep that meant working, not the loose, happy swing that meant nothing here. I stayed back and let him have it. Behind me I could hear Sevit's plating tick as the young Os shifted weight, and I could hear the array officer somewhere up the drift saying, every few minutes in that flat liturgical voice, "No return, no bioelectric return, no thermal return above background." "Tell him to stop saying that," I said quietly to Sevit. "It is the protocol. It's a prayer that the boy's dead," said out loud, every 5 minutes in a place where his mother could hear it if the air carried right. "Tell him to stop saying it." Sevit went still in the way the Os go still, all 4 arms drawing in. Then the young one moved off up the drift, and the litany stopped, and that was the first time I thought maybe one of them was going to be all right. Boone worked the fall for 40 minutes and gave me nothing, and I started to feel the thing you can't ever let the family see on your face, the slow, cold creep of the arithmetic. Flooded to the 3rd bench. 6 hours empty on the scan, now 7, now 8. A young miner ahead of a fall that came down without warning. The numbers were the numbers and the numbers were bad. And I have buried enough people to know that the dog finding nothing is, the great majority of the time, simply the truth arriving by a slower road. But you don't work the numbers, you work the dog. And around the 50th minute the dog changed. It's nothing you could put on an instrument, which is exactly the point. He'd been quartering back and forth along the base of the slide, and he came off it and went left, toward a low-standing section of the old drift that the fall hadn't taken, a stretch of original tunnel maybe 40 meters long that dead-ended in a worked-out stope. The scan had cleared it. Of course it had. There was nothing behind it but solid rock and the flooded void beyond the fall, and the flooded void read empty. But Boone went down that dead-end stretch with his head up, not down high air now, reading something riding above the water-cold draft along the floor, and his tail came up out of the slow sweep into something tighter and faster, and at the very end of it, at the blank rock face of the stope where the tunnel simply stopped, he stood, foursquare, nose working a seam in the rock no wider than a coin, and he sat down. I have spent a large part of my life learning to read one specific thing, which is what it means when a particular dog sits down. Boone sat down to tell me he was sure. It was his trained final response, the thing 1,500 hours of work had built into him, and he did not give it cheap. In 11 years I had never once known him to give it on a void. "Sevit," I said, my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Get the overseer, the dog has an alert." The young Os came down the drift fast and stopped at the rock face, and read it the only way the Os know how, which is to say through the array slave to the safety officer's arm, and I watched the readout glow across the plating, and I watched Sevit read it, and I knew what it would say before the young one spoke. "There is nothing here, Cal," not unkind, almost gentle the way you're gentle with a man whose dog has finally gotten too old to know better. "The rock is solid for 9 meters, beyond it is the flooded void, the scan is clear, the animal is mistaken." "The animal is not mistaken," I said. "The scan reads through 9 meters of the worst rock on your planet and tells you what's on the far side of it. The dog reads a thread of air coming through a crack in that rock and tells you what's breathing on the far side of it. One of those things is sitting down right now, Sevit, and I have known him 11 years, and he does not lie." Ren arrived then, and behind him, against every protocol, came the old cutter Ressa. Nobody had stopped her. Maybe nobody had the heart. She came down that dead-end drift on all 6 limbs, low and fast, and she put one hand flat against the rock face where Boone sat, and she held it there, and she said something in the Os tongue that the translator in my collar didn't bother to render, and I didn't need it rendered. Ren read the rock, Ren read the scan. Ren looked at the dog, and the dog looked back at him with the calm, flat patience of an animal who has done his job and is waiting for the slow ones to catch up. And I will give the overseer this until the day I die. He was a man of doctrine, and doctrine told him the void was empty and settled, and the time for the living to risk themselves was past. And he stood there at the rock face, and he had to decide, in the space of about 30 seconds, whether 40 years of trusting the instruments was worth more or less than a sitting dog. "The doctrine," Ren said slowly, "is built on the array." "Yes," I said. "And you are asking me to set the array aside. To break a face the scan reads as solid, on the word of an animal that smells through stone." "I'm asking you to put a microphone on that crack," I said. "That's all. Before you do anything, before you cut anything, you've got listening gear. Put it on the seam the dog's pointing at and turn off everything that hums and tell your people to hold still and listen. Not to the rock, to the air coming out of the rock. You don't have to believe the dog, overseer. You just have to listen to what the dog's already heard." It was Sevet who moved. The young one didn't wait for the order. Sevet was already unspooling the acoustic line off the safety rig, and that told me everything about which way the young Os had come down and pressed the head of it to the coin-wide seam in the rock, and the whole drift went quiet. The work lamps hummed. Water ran somewhere. The old cutter Ressa knelt with her palm on the stone and 4 eyes shut, and Boone sat, calm as a stone himself, and waited for the slow ones. The acoustic readout was a flat green line on Sevet's plating. It stayed flat for a long time. 10 seconds, 20. I watched it, and I watched the dog, and I told myself what I have told myself 1,000 times, that the dog is right and the air is slow, that scent rides a current that comes and goes, that a man behind 9 meters of rock breathes shallow when he's hurt and cold, and the path the air takes is long. Hold the rope. There's still rope. At 31 seconds the green line jumped. It wasn't much. If you hadn't been staring at it, you'd have missed it. A small ragged spike, and then nothing, and then 14 seconds later another. And another after that, irregular, weak, but there, riding up out of 9 meters of rock the array swore was solid and empty. The sound of something on the far side of the stone moving the air, tapping it. The slow, spaced, deliberate tap of the only signal a half-frozen miner pinned in the dark has left to give. The drift did not erupt. These were Os. But I have never in my life heard a silence change its weight the way that one did. Ren went very still, and then all 4 of his arms came unfolded at once, spread wide, and I understood by then that this was the Os body doing the thing a human chest does when the breath goes out of it all at once. "He is alive," Sevet said. The young one's voice had the buzz in it hard now. "Overseer, the apprentice is alive." "The scan," Ren began and stopped, because there was nothing on the other side of that sentence that mattered anymore. The scan had been wrong. The scan had read 9 meters of iron-rich blackstone in a flooded void, and it had returned with perfect mechanical honesty exactly what such rock returns, which is to say a lie shaped like the truth. And a dog had walked down a dead-end drift the array had cleared, and put his nose on a crack the width of a coin, and sat down. Ressa had not moved her hand from the stone. She was tapping it now, slow, spaced, deliberate. The same rhythm coming back the other way. A mother knocking on 9 meters of rock to tell her child the rock was about to open. Then it was a rescue, and a rescue I knew how to run. I want to tell you it was clean after that, but a rescue is never clean, and a rescue through bad rock above a flooded void is the worst kind there is. You can't just punch through 9 meters of blackstone. The seam the air was coming through ran up at an angle from somewhere down near the flood line, which meant the survivable pocket was high. Sol had climbed, smart boy, climbed the back of the stope as the water came up, and found a shelf of unbroken rock with a hand's width of crack feeding it air. And it meant any charge big enough to open the face fast was a charge big enough to drop the roof of the pocket and crush what we were trying to save, or break the seal that was keeping the flood out of it, and drown him in the dark while we watched the water rise on the scan. So we did it the slow way, the only way. We did it by hand and by patience and by the kind of small, careful machines the OS are very, very good at when you point them at a problem they believe in. And that was the thing that changed in the galleries that day, the thing I think about most. The OS did not half commit. The moment Wren accepted that the void was not empty, the moment the doctrine cracked, and the truth came through the crack the way the air had, every one of them turned the full weight of 40 worlds of mining craft onto getting that boy out, and there is nothing in the galaxy more formidable than an OS who has decided to dig. They are not fast. They are inexorable. They worked in shifts that they did not break for the things OS normally break shifts for, four-armed, reading the rock by touch, and by the small honest instruments that work at arm's length where the deep array doesn't, taking the face down a handspan at a time, shoring as they went, while Sevitt kept the acoustic line on the seam and called out every time the tapping came and every time it didn't, and the not times were the worst. The long, flat green silences where you stood there with your arithmetic and your rope. Boone I sent back up to the muster line after the alert. People always ask me why the hero of the thing sent off to a corner, and the answer is the unglamorous truth of the work. His job was done. He'd found the live one. There was nothing left for a nose to do at a rock face full of cutting machines and dust. Nothing but get underfoot and breathe grit. And the single most valuable thing on that whole site was now an old dog's lungs and an old dog's certainty, and I was not going to spend either of them standing around to look good. I took him up, and I had a young OS runner sit with him by the muster line with a bowl of water, and Boone drank and lay down with his chin on his paws and went asleep. He'd told us where the boy was. The rest was just rock. It took 19 hours. I won't walk you through all of them. I'll tell you the parts that stayed with me. I'll tell you that around the 11th hour the flood, which the scan had told us was stable, began to rise. The fall had shifted something far down in the workings, and the water found a new way in. And for 2 hours the question stopped being whether we could open the face before the boy froze, and started being whether we could open it before the water came up over his shelf. And Sevitt stood at the seam and called the flood line off the small instrument, and called the boys tapping off the acoustic line. 2 numbers climbing toward each other, and I have stood beside a lot of clocks in my life, but never one like that. And I'll tell you that the OS cutters, who could have stood off and run the machines from a safe distance the way the doctrine would have wanted, did not stand off. They got down in the bad rock above the water with their own bodies and their own arms, and took the face apart by hand, because hands could feel a thing about to slip that no instrument could, and that is its own kind of courage, and I have never once heard an OS call it that. And I'll tell you about Ressa, who would not leave the rock. They tried to move her gently twice, and the second time Wren himself came and stood over her and did not order her up, only stood, 4 arms folded, the old overseer keeping watch over the old cutter keeping watch over the crack, and she stayed. And she tapped the stone every hour on the hour to tell the boy the rock was still coming open. And every hour, weaker than the last, the boy tapped back. The 19th hour, near the end of it, the last handspan of rock came away under a cutter's arms, and there was a hole, and then there was a bigger hole, and then there was a void on the far side that was not empty, that had never been empty, that the array had sworn for 25 hours was a grave. And in it, on a shelf of unbroken blackstone a hand's width above a black flood, half frozen, one arm pinned and swollen, lips cracked, eyes gone strange with the dark and the cold and the certainty he'd been left, was a young OS apprentice cutter named Sol, alive. He was alive. They got a line to him, and they got water to him, and they got the broken arm braced. And it took 3 of them and the better part of an hour to bring him through the gap, and down the face and onto a litter. And the whole way out of the galleries, the old cutter Ressa walked alongside the litter with one hand on him, and did not say a word, because the os do not waste words on a thing this size. And at the muster line the boy was lifted up into the light, and the 11 who'd made it to the line on the first day came and stood around him in a ring with their arms spread wide. All of them, the whole shift. And that is the os for a sound no human throat can make, the spread arms, the breath gone out all at once, 11 of them and then 12. Boone woke up for it. He lifted his head off his paws when they brought the boy up, and he watched the ring of os with their arms spread, and he did the thing he always did at the end of a find, which was nothing at all. No fuss, no barking. He'd done his work, and the slow ones had finally caught up, and there was a live one breathing where the machines had said there was only the dead. And as far as Boone was concerned, that was simply how it was always going to turn out, and he'd told us so, and we should have listened sooner. He yawned. He put his chin back down. He went back to sleep. I sat down next to him on the cold floor of the muster hall, and I put my hand on his side and felt it go up and down, slow and even, and I'm not ashamed to tell you that I sat there a while. Wren came and stood over us. The overseer's plating was gray with rock dust, and there was a long scrape across one of the scarred shoulders where he'd been down in the face with the rest of them at the end. Doctrine or no doctrine. The array read the void empty, Wren said. He wasn't talking to me exactly. He was saying a thing he needed to say out loud to make it real the way you do. For 25 hours the instruments read a living cutter as the settled dead. By our doctrine he would be under the stone now. The drift would be charged and closed. We would have sealed him in alive and called it mercy, and never once doubted the reading, because the reading is the truth. The reading has always been the truth. All 4 eyes came down to the dog asleep under my hand, and an earth animal that smells through rock walked down a drift we had cleared and sat. He's done it before, I said. He'll do it again. The machines aren't wrong because they're machines, overseer. They're wrong because the rock lies to them, and they've got no way to know they're being lied to. The dog's got a different way in. That's all it ever is, a different way in. Wren was quiet. Then he said, "We have a word in the deep tongue for the one who is sent ahead into a place the instruments cannot read. It is an old word. It has not been used in a long time because we built the array, and the array reads everything, and so there was no longer any place the instruments could not read." A pause. We were mistaken about that. "What's the word?" He told me. The translator in my collar tried 3 times and gave up, the way it had given up on Ressa's prayer at the rock face, because some words don't carry, and I won't pretend I can write down a sound an os makes. But Sevet, who'd come up beside us with the dust still on the young plating, gave me the meaning, and I've kept it. "It means the one who goes where reading fails," Sevet said. "The one you send when the truth and the instrument no longer agree, and you must choose which to follow." The young one looked down at the old black dog asleep on the floor. "We will write it into the doctrine, the recovery doctrine of the Sumer galleries, that before a worked void is settled, before it is given to the stone, the one who goes where reading fails will be brought and walked, and his alert will stand above the array." A buzz, low, under the words. It will be the first time in 200 cycles the doctrine has placed any judgment above the array. There was much argument about the wording. The overseer ended the argument. How'd he end it? He said, "The array reads the rock, the animal read the boy." Sevet's arms drew in. There was no more argument after that. They wanted to do something for Boone. That was the os. Once they'd decided a thing was owed, there's no halfway in them. They wanted to feed him things, the wrong things, half of which would have killed him. And I had to stand at the muster hall and explain to a circle of grave 4-armed miners that the apex recovery animal of the Earth detachment could not in fact eat the ceremonial mineral paste of the Deep Cutters Guild, that he was a dog, that what he wanted was the dry brown pellets in the sack under my desk, and a warm place to sleep, and to be told, in a low voice, that he was a good boy, and that the last of those three was the only one they could really help with. So they helped with that. For a long time after, the Os of Sumer Deep, passing the old black Labrador asleep under my ration tray desk, would stop. They'd lower the great slate-plated bulk of themselves down close to the floor, all four arms folded, and they'd say it, clumsy in the human tongue, the consonants coming out wrong, the way you'd expect from a mouth that had never been built for it, good boy. And Boone would open one eye, and decide that this one at least had earned the standing up, and thump his tail twice against the floor and go back to sleep. Ressa came to find me before the end of my contract. The cutter's arm, soles, I mean, the boy's had healed crooked, but it had healed, and he was back at the face by then, walking with the careful slowness of someone who has spent a day and a night learning exactly how thin the rock is between the living and the stone. And Ressa came to the recovery wing alone and stood in the doorway a while before I noticed her. She didn't have much human in her by way of language, and I had no Os at all. So we did it through the collar, the translator stumbling between us, and most of what she said I won't put down because it wasn't said for putting down. But at the end of it she did a thing. She came across the little room, and she lowered herself down onto her lower limbs beside the sleeping dog, slow, an old cutter's body that didn't fold the way it used to. And she put one flat slate-gray hand on Boone's side and held it there, and felt it go up and down, slow and even the same way I had, and she stayed like that a while. Then she stood and looked at me, and the translator caught the last of it clean. "Your instruments told you he was alive," she said, "when ours told us he was dead." "He's not an instrument," I said. "He's just a dog, that's the whole thing. He's just an old dog with a good nose who doesn't know how to quit. We didn't send a machine that's better than yours. We sent a thing that doesn't lie about the rock because it's never heard of the rock. It only knows what's breathing." Ressa looked at the dog a long moment more. "On my world," she said, "we built a way of knowing so good that we forgot a thing could be true that the way of knowing did not show. You did not forget." She turned the great slate face toward me. "I do not know how your kind keeps from forgetting it." "We don't mostly," I said. "We forget it all the time, that's why we keep the dog." I left Tessel Deep when my contract ran out, and Boone left with me, because there was never any version of it where he didn't. He's older now. He's slow on the stairs in a way that isn't going to get better, and there'll come a season when the paperwork retiring him won't get torn up by anyone senior, because the most senior person left who cares about that dog is me, and I'll have to sign it myself, and I am not looking forward to that day. But it isn't here yet. He still sleeps with his chin on my boot. He still opens one eye when somebody walks past and decides whether they're worth standing for. And every so often in the night, I'll see his paws move and his nose work in his sleep, chasing something down a current of air in a dream. And I'll put my hand on his side and feel it go up and down, slow and even. And I'll think about a circle of four-armed miners with their arms spread wide around a boy the machines had buried, and the word they wrote into their doctrine that my collar could never say. The one who goes where reading fails. They had every instrument in the Concord. They had an array that could read the water table to the meter through 9 meters of stone. They had 200 cycles of doctrine that had never once been wrong enough to doubt. And in the end, when the reading and the truth stopped agreeing and a life hung in the gap between them, the thing that walked down the cleared drift and sat down at the crack in the rock was an old black dog who couldn't read a thing, and didn't need to, and never once thought about quitting. He just knew what was breathing. And he told us. We should have listened sooner.